evening, everybody. I'm Hannah Chalker alongside SEC recruiting reporter Pete Scantlebury. This is the SEC Recruiting Notebook. The 2018 National Signing Day is in the books, Pete. Long day for everybody here. I know we're going on like fumes, 12 hours for everybody. We've got a really good show coming up for you today. We're going to talk about Georgia, Alabama, and we have other recruiting reporters from all around the SEC that are going to be live on our 45-minute show. So stick with us. Pete, what'd you think about today?
You know, it's definitely a different feel with that early signing period in December kind of taking out some of the luster of today. But what this day lacked in volume of recruits, it made up for it in drama. We saw so much. We saw Jacob Copeland, the Florida signee, what happened with his mom, and we'll get to that later. We saw Georgia ink the top class in the nation. Just plenty of drama, even though there weren't as many signatures as we're used to seeing on a day like this.
I think Georgia might have won the day. We have to get to a lot of these schools, but Georgia might have won the day. Let's take a look at the end of today, February 7th. This is what the rankings look like. Georgia sits atop the league and the country, the #1 recruiting class in the nation. Alabama behind it, 2 in the SEC, but 9th in the nation. What does that gap show you?
You know, I wouldn't look too much into the gap between Georgia and Alabama in this class. The fact is Alabama has signed a good number of big recruiting classes in a row. At the end of the day, this becomes a numbers game. Alabama didn't have the room to really get the volume that Georgia did in this class. That's not taking anything away from Georgia, but it is saying that Alabama fans don't need to freak out about anything that happened today.
Georgia does sign 6 guys today, but 7 5-stars total in the 2018 signing class for the Dogs. That's a record according to 24/7 Sports in the modern era. What was the biggest surprise to you today for the Dogs?
I think the only surprise really was how quickly they wrapped up the #1 class. I mean, we knew that they had to come in, they had to land 5-star Tyson Campbell, which they did, and then if they landed both Quay Walker and Otis Reese, 4-star outside linebackers, they would have the top class. I don't think anybody predicted them to get all 3. They did get all 3. They got all 3, and the race was over before it even began. I think that was the only surprise for me for the day with Georgia.
All morning we were seeing Georgia, Georgia, Georgia. Who didn't commit to Georgia today?
I think just the Pope was the only person that didn't commit to Georgia. I mean, it's insane the momentum they have on the recruiting trail. And keep in mind, they also have the #1 class for 2019 right now, too.
All right, let's talk about Alabama. They are 2nd in the league in their recruiting class. Had some losses today, and a late loss, in fact, to Isaac Taylor Stewart. Are there any worries there? You know, the first time in quite a while Alabama has not landed the #1 class, actually sitting at 9th right now.
Yeah, you know, and like I kind of said earlier, it was a weird day for Alabama. It seemed like they took 1 step forward, 1 step back. I mean, the biggest news for them is they landed the commitment of Patrick Surtain Jr., the nation's #1 cornerback. That's a huge, huge pickup for them. They definitely missed on a few guys late in the game, but again, you know, when you're signing the #1 class year in and year out, this is going to happen. You're building so much depth that every now and then recruiting is going to take a little bit of a step back, but I don't think this is going to be anything long term. They'll sign a big class next year, and they'll be right back in the thick of things to be the top-ranked class in the nation.
How is Saban able to beat out LSU and Orgeron for Surtain Jr.? I know that was quite the heated battle down to today, I guess.
You know, and we'll find out a little bit more about that when we have Sam Spiegelman, our LSU reporter on. But I think the big thing, and Patrick Surtain said this, he wants to win championships. Don't win championships right now at LSU, win them at Alabama.
What are some other big names that committed to Alabama today, that actually signed to Alabama today, and thoughts on the class as a whole?
You know, I think the biggest one they got late in the day is Jalen Waddle, 4-star wide receiver out of Texas. I think that was a big get for them. They needed some momentum on the offensive side of the ball. I think landing him late gave them that momentum they sorely needed after missing out on a few guys today.
All right, you guys are watching SEC Recruiting Notebook. I'm Hannah Chalker alongside our SEC Country recruiting editor, Pete Scantlebury. We've got a lot coming up. We have 5 different SEC recruiting reporters from across the league, and we are going to start with Blake Morgan. He is our Tennessee recruiting reporter. What do you think about the Tennessee recruiting class today?
You know, again, it is an interesting mix. I would compare it to Alabama just in terms of the highs and lows of the day. I think the biggest news is they hung on to J.J. Peterson, 4-star outside linebacker that was committed to Alabama before Jeremy Pruitt left. That's a big get, but you know, missing out on Quay Walker, that's a big deal.
All right, we want to bring in Blake. Blake, it's been a long day for everybody. How you hanging in there?
Pretty good, pretty good. Got a few more stories and headlines to get up there, though.
I want to talk about Quay Walker first, and the dramatics of his, well, decommitment to Tennessee. He reaches for the Tennessee hat. He puts it almost on before saying he's going to Georgia. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I thought that, wow, Tennessee had weathered the storm, right? Because Georgia had the official visit over the weekend. They were picking up momentum, and all of a sudden, it looked like they were going to get him, and then he picks up the Tennessee hat, and I said, well, you know, it looks like Pruitt's in for another good signing period. Well, not so much. He threw it off. Tennessee fans were very upset, and, you know, I thought it was obvious that Tennessee fans were going to be the most upset at Cade Mays coming out of this class, but now that actually might be Quay Walker, and of course both of them are going to Georgia, and Tennessee will play them every year that they're in college.
Yeah, Blake, on those lines, you know, they lost Quay Walker, but they managed to hold on to J.J. Peterson. How much drama surrounded that recruitment late, and what was the feeling going in today about what he was going to decide?
Yeah, AL.com had a story on Monday talking with his coach, Russ Prof, his high school coach, saying that Tennessee had really closed the gap, that it was about 50-50, but, you know, if you really read the article and looked into what was said, it was more about what Prof thought Peterson was feeling and not really what Peterson was feeling. So there was some anxiety, especially after Walker flipped, but I think Tennessee was always fairly confident they were going to hold on to him. And you got to remember, Peterson committed to Tennessee before ever even taking an official visit to Knoxville. So he did it because of his admiration and respect for Pruitt and this coaching staff. And I mean, that didn't change, so I didn't believe his commitment was going to change.
Gotcha. And Blake, real quick, how does J.J. Peterson fit in immediately on the depth chart? Is he a guy that's going to play as a freshman?
I think absolutely. Pruitt talked about it today. I just finished up with his press conference just a little bit ago. Pruitt said that Peterson is a unique guy that can play can play the four different linebacker positions in Tennessee's 3-4 defense. Tennessee has played the 4-2-5 the past, 3 or 4 seasons, so they don't have a lot of linebacker depth, and they don't really have a lot of good linebacker depth. So I would not be surprised at all if J.J. Peterson is the starter when Tennessee goes to West Virginia, or goes to Charlotte to face West Virginia to open up the 2018 season. And at the very least, I would expect J.J. Peterson to be starting against Florida next season.
Hey, Blake, thanks so much for your time. I know it's been a really long day for you. Awesome stories on seccountry.com, the Tennessee page. So we'll see you later. Thanks so much for your time, Blake.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Pete, what's your overall thought on Pruitt today?
You know, it's going to be tough to gauge these new coaches in their first full recruiting class. I think he definitely found some good momentum today, but really with these new coaches, especially with Pruitt, we know what a great recruiter he is, but he's going to need a full cycle at Tennessee to really show what he can do and land some of these high-level guys that Tennessee's going to need to compete in the SEC East and compete for SEC titles against his former employer in Alabama and Nick Saban.
Bruce Loudermill in the comic section says next year is when Tennessee has the #1 class. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, honestly, I wouldn't put it out of the question. I mean, we saw what Tennessee did immediately under Butch Jones on the recruiting trail, and they competed for a top 5 class year in, year out. I think Jeremy Pruitt, just with his background, with the reputation he has as a recruiter, I think he absolutely could get them in running. I mean, certainly they'll be in the top 10, I feel like, next year. They'll have more room to sign recruits. And again, Jeremy Pruitt will have more time to kind of work his magic there in Knoxville.
All right, Hale McGranahan is up next. He's our South Carolina SEC Country recruiting reporter. Hale, how's your day been?
Oh, not too bad. Much more calm than signing days past, that's for sure.
I want to talk to you about Rick Sandage today making his choice of South Carolina over UGA. Of course, the 4-star defensive tackle we are talking about. His mom, of course, went to South Carolina, and there's been this head versus heart, as Jeff Sentell calls it, between the two schools. Were you surprised that he picked South Carolina today?
No, I was not, although it certainly looked like that he was really considering Georgia at points down the stretch, but it's really been South Carolina all along. They're one of the first schools on him, the most consistent all throughout the recruiting process for him. And the work that Will Muschamp put in, I mean, he pretty much led the charge from the get-go on this guy, and I think that played a big part in South Carolina ultimately being able to reel him in.
Yeah, Hale, I know you kind of said, you know, it was South Carolina for a long time, and then maybe it was a little up in the air down the stretch. I guess what did South Carolina kind of have to show him in the end there to make sure that he stayed that lock that people thought he was?
A big thing, Pete, opportunity for playing time. Like a lot of these guys who are coming from the high school level and getting into the college level, they want to have a chance to play early, and that's an option or an opportunity that South Carolina was able to sell to Rick, is come and compete, have a chance to win a spot in the rotation or maybe even a starting job. They lost a few defensive linemen from last year's team, a couple starters, and certainly some opportunity there for Rick to step in and make an early impact. So I think that was probably at the end of the day, beyond the relationships and the consistency with South Carolina's effort in recruiting Rick, is the opportunity for playing time. And obviously with Georgia being where they're at with their signing class here this year and here in recent years with Kirby Smart, there's a lot more talent, obviously, but a lot of potential guys that could be ahead of Rick before he even steps on campus on that depth chart.
And Hale, I know, Will Muschamp's been there for a few years now. You've seen him develop as a recruiter with South Carolina. What are your thoughts overall on this class? I mean, there wasn't much drama today for South Carolina. They did most of their work in the early signing period. Where does this class kind of fit in with the recent classes under Muschamp?
Well, it's right there with them, probably a little bit better. We'll have to wait to see how the rankings shake out from a national perspective, but I think it's going to be the highest ranked class Muschamp signed by maybe a couple spots. But when you look at the totality of the class, there are a few weaknesses, some glaring weaknesses, I could even say. A lot of it comes from not being able to get some guys on the defensive line, guys like Xavier Thomas, who signed with Clemson, Stephon Wynn, who signed with Alabama, Josh Belk, who signed with Clemson, guys that they really had their eye on early on in the process, but weren't able to get. And they just simply got beat by some schools that happened to beat pretty much everybody else they come into contact with on the recruiting trail. So for South Carolina, while that's something that we'll talk about right now, once these guys get into school, and 13 of them enrolled in January, but once some of these defensive linemen get in, like a Rick Sandage, like a Kingsley Enagbare, who's a mid-year enrollee, Tyreek Johnson, who's also a mid-year guy, some of these other guys who they've signed now, we'll kind of forget about that stuff. But they definitely got better today. That's really cliche to say, but there's a lot of guys who are going to have a chance to come in and compete early. Some guys at the defensive backfield, and of course up front on that defensive line. So lots of 4 stars and players that South Carolina fans have been really excited about throughout this whole cycle.
Hale, one more quick one. In your opinion, if you had to make a bold prediction in this class, who stands out as a true freshman? Who makes the biggest impact?
The biggest impact as a true freshman? Well, I don't think it would be too bold to say a guy like J.C. Horn, because he's such a highly rated player, former Tennessee commitment, cornerback, had a chance to go to Alabama before he committed to Tennessee, ultimately, obviously, signed with South Carolina. But if there's a guy who I think could make an impact this year, that's not necessarily a bigger name guy, would be, I would think, Israel Mukwamu, 6'4", cornerback. Not a lot of those guys floating around, but he signed out of Louisiana. Actually grew up here in South Carolina. But given some of the holes in the secondary with guys like Chris Lamons, Jamarcus King, and DJ Smith now gone, plenty of opportunity for a guy like Mukwamu or even J.C. Horn to step in and play early, if not become a starter before the season's over.
Hale, thanks so much for your time today. I know you've been working hard. Great work on SECCountry.com, of course, the South Carolina page. We really appreciate your time today.
All right, guys, thanks.
Pete, we're taking comments in the comment section all throughout our live show, and there's one that sticks out to me. It's from Will Scott, and he says, when Sandage announced UGA had a full class, best decision for him. And I've got to bring up that 26 guys now in the 2018 class for UGA. What does that do with the NCAA rule of 85 scholarships?
You know, it's kind of it's a moving target, I would say. You know, the basic thing that you have to worry about in recruiting is you can only sign 25 guys per class. Now you ask, how does Georgia have 26? Well, you can backdate recruits if they enroll early. So pretty much Georgia just has to make sure they backdate at least one player in this class, and they have plenty of early enrollees to do that, to still fall in that limit. For the 85 scholarship limit, you know, they'll figure out ways. Guys will transfer, things happen like that. It's not really that big of a concern.
All right, it's LSU's turn. For all of you LSU fans out there watching right now, Sam Spiegelman is on the line. Hey, Sam, what's going on? I think we're having some trouble hearing you, Sam. We'll see if we can get a little bit better connection here. I've got a question for you off the top, though. The loss of five-star cornerback Patrick Surtain Jr. to Alabama was a pretty big move today. How big of a loss was that for the Tigers, and were you surprised? Looks like we're having a tough time getting Sam on. We're going to try to get him right back on. Same question to you, Pete. What do you think about that?
Yeah, you know, I know Patrick Surtain Jr. obviously was considered an LSU lean for a very long time. There's no way to mitigate this. This is a big loss for LSU. I mean, I think most of the questions in Ed Orgeron's press conference today were about Patrick Surtain. It's Sam, actually, hopefully we get him back. He writes a great article today about what this means. And, you know, it's good they got Kelvin Joseph, a four-star cornerback, to sign today. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a big loss.
All right, we have Sam back. Hey, Sam, you with us?
Yeah, you guys hear me a little bit better?
Yeah, we got you. I know it's been a really long day for you. Awesome work on SECcountry.com. Hey, I'll ask you the same question I asked you before. Patrick Surtain Jr., the loss of him to Alabama, were you surprised with that at all?
Yeah, I certainly was, and it was a devastating hit to LSU for the 2018 class. Pat informed Coach O about 11 p.m. local time, so about midnight of National Signing Day Eve. All indications were that Pat had been telling LSU, yes, I'm in, up until essentially the 23rd hour. Why that's important, LSU has 4 scholarship corners heading into 2018. LSU has tended to have a wealth of cornerbacks in years past. That's not the case after Dante Jackson and Tolliver declared for the NFL draft. Corey Raymond, the secondary coach, had been planning to have Greedy Williams, an all-SEC corner, on one side, and the All-American corner, Pat Surtain, on the other. Now it's kind of a wishy-washy situation. There's a former 5-star, Chris Fulton. We don't know whether he's going to be eligible to play in 2018 or not, so that kind of looms pretty large for the Tigers coming up. But, you know, Alabama did a fantastic job beginning with his official visit on January 19th. I know that they definitely brought him there for a specific weekend for the national championship parade, and that loomed large. They also kind of talked up whether Corey Raymond was going to be there much longer, and as much as Corey Raymond tried to intimate that he was going to stay at LSU for the foreseeable future, Nick Saban tried to capitalize on all the teams that kind of covered Corey, and meanwhile pointed to himself as kind of the point of stability for Alabama, and that was ultimately the decisive factor for Pat Surtain after 2 years leading for LSU, picking Alabama.
Gotcha. Sam, you know, it's funny you said Nick Saban kind of focusing on the uncertainty at LSU when they've had a huge amount of turnover in their coaching ranks in Tuscaloosa this offseason. But real quick, with Jamar Chase, the 4-star wide receiver that committed there, I know he's had kind of a wild recruiting ride starting with the NFL Network announcement fiasco over the summer. But he got really emotional when he committed to LSU. Can you just talk about that a little bit more, and why was he so emotional when he announced today?
Yeah, it really echoed the same exact thing that went down. 6 weeks for Marshall is one of his best friends committed to LSU, and when I caught up with Jamar after, like you said, he's had a twisty-turny recruitment. A year ago at this time, he committed to Kansas. People forget about that. Then he was going to commit to TCU in June at the opening, had his TCU gloves to pick over LSU at the time, and that was to honor his grandma. He was planning to do that on his grandmother's birthday. He was unable to do it then because of the NFL Network mishap. comes back, kind of spontaneously visits Florida, gives Jim McElwain a commitment. And if he had still been the coach of Florida, he'd probably be signing with the Gators today. Since he kind of was forced to reopen his recruitment, rather, LSU has kind of been the point of stability, and I think he was really just kind of taken back by the way that they continued to prioritize him, even when he committed to Florida. You know, he really wanted to go to Florida. Trust me when I say that. And he really had always leaned towards out-of-state options, but LSU made it so important that he was like family to him. And his dad, who's also from New Orleans, played, you know, low-level college football. They are all LSU fans in his family. They respected it when he wanted to go out of state. But he made his family, his mom and dad, so happy by picking LSU. And I think he felt that when he told them that's where he was going to go today. He didn't make up his mind until early Wednesday morning. Even though he's been leaning toward LSU, that decision was not finalized until Wednesday. And I think he made his parents and the rest of his family so happy. They were all decked out in purple today. And, yeah, it's not cheap purple, but it's a different shade, and it worked well for his family. And they were just exhilarated to see him pick the hometown team and being able to see him on Saturdays now.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. I have one more quick question for you. One thing that stood out to me about Ed Orgeron in his press conference today is he was very candid about the guys they missed on. I mean, talking at length about Surtain, talking at length about, you know, trying to get Mario Goodrich in the fold late. But overall, with his first full recruiting cycle now, how do you see him as a recruiter for LSU? Is he the guy they need on the recruiting trail? I mean, how is that coming together?
So, obviously, when you look at the way the staff is assembled around Coach O, is that, yeah, he's going to be kind of a orchestrator of sorts, but his main trait and why they got him is because he can recruit, and they expected him to go toe-to-toe with Nick Saban and with Jimbo Fisher and Dabo Swinney and Kirby Smart for the best guys in the country. And he's had a couple of wins here and there. You look at Terrace Marshall, you look at Jamar Chase, and you look at Kelvin Joseph. What you do have to look on is in 2018, the big thing was Alabama's ability to pluck kids right from Baton Rouge or different parts of Louisiana and bring them in. They did that last year with Devontae Smith, who obviously caught the game-winning touchdown in the national championship. But Arian Mathis, who was Louisiana's #1 lineman last year. Isaiah Buggs, who was from Ruston. And Chris Allen, who was a priority guy, and Dylan Moses, both from Baton Rouge, all ended up in Alabama a year ago. LSU signed 8 of the top 10 guys inside the state for Louisiana in 2018. So I know that today is kind of a tough day for LSU besides Jamar Chase, boom. Because if Surtain hadn't been open, that LSU was his leader for 2 years, and if he had picked Clemson or Miami or Florida State instead of LSU, probably would have stung so badly, but because of Nick Saban, it still stung. He has effectively put a bit of a fence around Louisiana, which looms large because his biggest test is 2019. 2018 is about kind of upgrading the roster in a couple of key spots. They did so effectively in a couple of areas, obviously missing on quarterback and corner. But 2019 is loaded, where you have top 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 guys in their respective positions. They're all inside the state. If LSU and Coach O can replicate the kind of success they had in Louisiana in 2018 with the 2019 class, they're going to be in very good shape, and people are very quickly going to forget about this year's National Signing Day mishaps.
Great stuff, Sam. Awesome information. Good work on SECcountry.com. Thanks so much for your time.
Yep, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, everybody, you are watching SEC Recruiting Notebook. This is Pete Scantleberry. I'm Hannah Chalker, our SEC Country recruiting editor. He knows everything about this. We've had a really good show so far. We've talked about a lot of schools. We have Arkansas, Florida, and Auburn coming up. But before that, let's take a look at today's rankings. There we see Georgia sitting at #1, Alabama 2. We do have the Arkansas guy coming up. They're at 14, Pete.
Yeah, you know, and we'll talk with Trent Shaded a little bit about that. I think what people fail to realize about the recruiting rankings a lot of times is it comes down to a numbers game. Arkansas does not have a lot of room. Chad Moore says he's not going to fill spots just to find bodies. They only signed 16 guys. With that small volume of recruits, Arkansas is not going to be able to rank with the other players. Doesn't mean that they didn't hit their needs and sign a good class, though.
Well, let's go right there. We have Trent Shaded on the line right now, our Arkansas SEC Country recruiting reporter. Trent, how's your day been?
Busy, I think, probably like everybody else. Hope you guys are doing well.
We're hanging in there. It's been a very long day. Hey, kind of a quiet day for the Hogs, right? But what did you think about Morris's first signing class with Arkansas?
Well, it accomplished what it needed to get done. They got 4 defensive linemen. They need more depth there. That's big. So while you're only signing 16 guys, a quarter of them are defensive line. You get 2 safeties where you've been really thin the last couple of years. So really, the front end and the back end of the defense, you shorted up, and you got some guys who were recruited by some big-time SEC schools. You won some battles. And so because of that, I think it's got to be viewed as a success for a coach who's an offensive mind to get some important defensive pieces in his first class.
Trent, I know that you and I have talked about this before, but with Chad Morris's connection to Texas and Texas high school football especially, how do you see this setting up for the future with him? I mean, Arkansas has recruited Texas before with some success, maybe not as much under their previous coach. What's the future look like with Chad Morris and Texas recruiting for Arkansas?
Yeah, I don't think you notice it as much in this class, but like you're mentioning the future, that's when you will notice it. 2019, 2020, even 2021, they're already on a bunch of kids in Texas, East Texas for sure, where they have a ton of big connections. Dallas, obviously, where Morris just was at SMU. He's coached at Lake Travis in the Austin area. So he knows them all. He knows every coach down there. A lot of his staff knows them all. So they can talk to their guys. They can talk to their big recruits, and they can say, I know what you're getting with Chad Morris. I know you're going to be in good hands. I think there's more guys realizing, like, hey, East Texas is only 4.5 hours, 4 hours in some places to Fayetteville. It's 5 to Austin in some places. So they're realizing it's closer. It's a little bit more realistic of an option for them now that guys like Chad Morris and running backs coach Jeff Traylor are there. So I think you'll see that pay off over the next couple of years with some potentially big time, 4-star even Texas high school recruit.
Gotcha. Trent, I got one more quick one for you. I know fans are excited about Connor Nolan, 4-star quarterback, Bumper Pool, 4-star linebacker, an all-name team in the SEC. But who are fans not talking about that you think could make a big impact as a freshman this year?
The one for me is Billy Farrell, the defensive tackle. I mentioned the defensive line and how important that was, but Farrell is a kid who's, Arkansas's previous staff kind of slow played him. He's from Fordyce, Arkansas, so he's right there in the state. But he wasn't just this huge, highly rated recruit because he played at a small classification in high school. So they slow played him. Then Morris gets here. Morris puts him at the top of his priority board almost immediately. Alabama came through with an offer for him. Had a ton of, Auburn was looking at him, a ton of big schools. And really he wanted to go to Arkansas. He's an Arkansas kid. So they end up getting him. They show him he's a huge priority. And look, when you're 6'2", 320, and you've played running back in high school as a senior, obviously you're athletic enough to play defensive line probably in the SEC. So he's the one that I think not only could play immediately, but could potentially be a really big addition for the next season.
Wow, thanks so much, Trent, for your awesome information. And great work today on SECCountry.com. And thanks for your time tonight on our show.
Hey, appreciate it, guys. Have a good one.
So, Pete, what Trent was saying, what we were saying too, quiet day for Arkansas, but how would you assess what Chad Morris is trying to build there?
It's hard to assess, and I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself about this, but with these new coaches, they have not had a full recruiting cycle. And especially with a guy like Chad Morris that wants to run a spread offense, which obviously Brett Bielema definitely did not, he's got to find his players. I think, again, that's why you see them sign a smaller class. They have some room for some transfers once that market kind of opens up in a little while. But I think the biggest thing for Chad Morris going forward is they're going to have to evaluate him after his first season, after his first full recruiting class to see what kind of talent they get and which guys he gets to fit his system.
We have our Florida and Auburn reporters coming up in just a minute, but I have a curveball for you. Somebody we are not talking about today, well, we don't have a recruiting reporter to talk about them, is Ole Miss. And let me ask you one question about Ole Miss, because I love all of our commenters in the comment section, but I might have gone to Ole Miss. So Lance Herndon says, proud to be an Ole Miss fan. They did as well as they could, all things considered. Your thoughts on the Ole Miss class? Have you been following them at all?
Yeah, you know, I think saying that they did as well as they could, all things considered, is underselling it just a little bit. Considering everything they were going through, coaching change, possible NCAA sanctions, everything like that, they signed a heck of a class. And again, yeah, ranked 30th in the country, 10th in the SEC. I mean, they beat out programs that had much more stability than them. It's really impressive what Coach Luke did in his first recruiting class there.
All right, well, let's talk about the 15th recruiting class in the country, talking about the Florida Gators, and on to talk about just that is Zach Albaverdi. Hey, Zach, how's your day been?
It's been not too bad. It was pretty slow in the morning, and it got really eventful in the afternoon for Florida.
Yeah, really eventful was Jacob Copeland's commitment. I mean, what was your thoughts on that strange thing with his mom walking off? She had the Alabama sweatshirt there, the Tennessee hat on, and as soon as he put the Gator hat on, she just picks up her purse and's like, I'm out of here. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because, you know, certainly it looked like he was going through a lot with that decision, and he had tweeted, I think earlier in the week, that he was up, you know, the night before crying. And so I think he had a lot on his mind, and he posted a message on Facebook even saying that people in my own family don't want to see me succeed. So he had a lot weighing on him, and it's a kudos, first of all, to him, how he handled that situation, but number two, that Dan Mullen and his staff were able to get him to come to Florida, you know, despite all that, you know, pushback.
Yeah, and Zach, specifically in his recruitment, I know Emory Jones, the quarterback that's already enrolled, played a big part in seeming, at least on social media, in trying to get Copeland to commit to Florida. How much of a recruiter has Emory been in his short time at Florida?
Yeah, he's kind of been working, you know, the class behind the scenes. I think a lot of people didn't realize that Justin Watkins, another top 100 recruit that they signed today, that, you know, Emory Jones really worked on him that week in Orlando when they were there for the Under Armour All-America practices, and obviously had a big impact on Jacob Copeland. Those guys go back over a year. They've been friends. Honestly, and I've said this before, but I think that Jacob Copeland has a better relationship with Emory Jones than Florida's former quarterback commit, Matt Corral, who ended up going to Ole Miss. So it was just kind of a perfect storm for Florida that worked out. They had players going after him, coaches going after him, and obviously, you know, the in-state appeal as well.
And Zach, I know that you and I have talked about this for a long time, but Florida fans were always kind of griping about the recruiting rankings under Jim McElwain. How is Dan Mullen already sizing up in that regard with his first class now in Gainesville?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You look at Jim McElwain's classes at Florida, Pete, and none of them had an average star rating above 90, which is kind of what you need to be in that top 15, top 10 range. Dan Mullen gets that his first year. This past class, Jim McElwain only signed one, consensus top 100 overall recruit. Dan Mullen got 4, and then he got 2 more in the wide receiver transfers that don't show up on the commitment list, but still talent that Florida add to the roster. So he got some big fish, man, and he also showed, especially today with them beating out Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney, that he can go toe-to-toe with some of the best head coaches in college football and win highly contested recruiting battles.
Yeah, and Zach, I mean, you kind of have already hinted on that, but what does this mean for 2019? What happens when Dan Mullen has a full cycle to build these relationships and lock down the state of Florida? What is that 2019 class, in your opinion, going to look like under Mullen?
Well, yeah, first of all, it's a great year for the state of Florida, so the Gators are going to benefit from that. But just the energy that he's brought, Pete, just on the recruiting trail, showing up at schools with J's on, flying in on helicopters, and just bringing excitement back to Florida football. I think we saw it really work out well for him and his staff in this cycle. They closed strong during the early signing period. They closed strong today on National Signing Day. But like you said, with a full year and a chance to go out and put a better product on the field, just imagine what this staff can do. It's going to be fun to watch.
Zach, real quick, what were your thoughts on them missing out on five-star offensive tackle Nicholas Petit-Frere?
Yeah, certainly that would have been one the Gators would have liked to get. The fact that he went to schools that they don't have to compete with is, I guess, okay. But I said going into the day, they needed to sign 4 offensive linemen. That was their goal going into this cycle, and they had Richard Garage making a final decision today. That's he and Petit-Frere are both top 100 overall tackles from Tampa, Florida. It would have been nice to get both of them, but I think it was important for Florida to at least sign one of them, and they were able to beat out Clemson and Auburn for Garage. So, that was a nice addition today as well.
Zach, thanks so much for your time today. Great work on SECCountry.com.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Pete, Florida was on a crash course, to say the least, before Dan Mullen got there. Do you think today kind of is the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, it's getting closer if it's not the light at the end of the tunnel. Again, like Zach said, the recruiting rankings matter, and they matter especially in a place like Gainesville where they should be going for the nation's elite recruits year in and year out. I don't think you can doubt at all that Dan Mullen has brought some serious swagger back to Gainesville that Jim McElwain was severely lacking in. And the future's bright. Again, it's maybe not the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're seeing it. And 2019 is going to be a big, big recruiting class for the Gators.
I want to take one quick comment before we get Ben Wolk on. He is our Auburn SEC Country recruiting reporter for the Tigers. Will Scott in the comment section says, Florida did well enough today, but next year Georgia will only win by 40 this time. We have a lot of Georgia people in the comment section, rightfully so. They had a historic signing class this year. Just final thoughts on Florida.
Man, it's going to be hard for them to compete with Georgia on the field next year. But again, recruiting is the long game, and they took some major steps. I know a big thing in Gainesville is going to be the strength and conditioning program that severely slacked under McElwain. Mullen develops players. He developed them at Mississippi State. He knows Florida. Again, my final thoughts are give them a year or two, and they'll be back.
All right, we will let the Georgia and Florida fans hash it out in the comment section. For now, let's bring in Ben Wolk, our Auburn SEC Country recruiting reporter. Hey, Ben, how's your day been?
I'm great, Hannah. How are you?
We're doing good. We're hanging in there. Hey, we've got a couple questions for you. We want to get your overall thoughts on the Auburn class. But first, I want to talk about 4-star wide receiver Matthew Hill. How close was he to flipping, and how happy are you that he's staying on the Plains?
Yeah, well, I think it was probably closer than a lot of people would have liked to believe. He was in a serious decision process of whether he wanted to play wide receiver at Auburn or safety at Clemson, and Clemson certainly made it hard for him in the end. But, Auburn, they really tackled this recruitment very early on. He camped at Auburn as a sophomore and as a junior, and so they've had a relationship with him for a long period of time. And it wasn't just the wide receivers coach, Cody Burns. It was linebackers coach Travis Williams, who's responsible for his area and recruiting. And I think that, at the end of the day, he'd been committed to Auburn since the summer, and even though Clemson was making an interesting push, he decided to stick with where his heart was from the beginning, and that's a huge recruiting win for Auburn just because Matthew Hill's been one of the fastest risers in the recruiting rankings over the course of his senior season, and he's a wide receiver that's got a really versatile skill set. So, I think that was, even though there were some other big fish out there, uncommitted guys, keeping him in this class was one of the bigger wins Auburn could have had today.
Yeah, Ben, you talked about how early Auburn got in on Hill, and people, while everybody is parading around Georgia's class today, they probably missed on Hill. They didn't offer him until very late, and again, like you said, Auburn got in on him early. But with that potential that he could play defense as well, are the Auburn coaches discussing that with him, or is he all set at wide receiver for Auburn?
They certainly see him right now as a wide receiver, though they're so aware of that skill set. They know that if they need it, they can bring it in. The thing with that is Auburn brought in 3 safeties in this class, 2 of them, Quindarius Monday and Damian Sherwood, that they really thought out from the beginning of the process. And they saw guys that could step in as true freshmen maybe and start on this Auburn defense. Then they've got, another guy who's maybe a linebacker, maybe a safety. So it's not necessarily that Auburn's going, Auburn don't necessarily need a safety, but if they do, Matthew Hill certainly has a skill set to do it, and Auburn has a ton of depth at wide receiver. They just brought in 4 guys in this recruiting cycle, and they aren't even losing anybody at wide receiver from their 2017 roster. So I think that he'll stick at wide receiver, but if they need a safety, Matthew Hill will be their go-to guy.
And Ben, we're going to stick with the wide receivers here for a second, and this is a guy that did not sign with Auburn or Alabama, but the #1 ranked player in the state of Alabama, Justin Ross, goes to Clemson. I don't know if Auburn was as high at the end as maybe Alabama or Clemson, but how big of a surprise is that? I think maybe you or somebody else tweeted out that this is only the third time in the last 20 years that the #1 ranked player in Alabama left the state.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely uncommon. I mean, like you said, since 2000, there's only been 2 other times that the #1 player in the state of Alabama left the state. That was in 2003 when Chad Jackson went to Florida, and then in 2012 when Jameis Winston went to Florida State. I mean, generally speaking, Alabama, I mean, you know, I think 10 of the last 11 years, Alabama has gotten the #1 player in the state of Alabama. So from an optics standpoint, it's probably a bigger miss for Alabama than it was for Auburn. With that said, I mean, I know that there was a lot of perception out there that Auburn wasn't in this thing, and I'll just say this, today, a lot of my sources were buzzing that this was coming down to the 11th hour, and, you know, Justin Ross was still in the throes of his decision, and there was a lot of internal conflict within the Ross family about which direction maybe he wanted to go. You know, and we say that it's a surprise because he's the #1 player in the state, and that guy doesn't generally lead the state of Alabama, but he has been somewhat trending toward Clemson for the long haul in his recruiting process. I mean, dating back to the summer, that was where I thought he was going to end up. It was only in the close, you know, recently at the end of this recruiting cycle where I felt that one of the 2 in-state schools might have made a strong enough push, but obviously he's going to join Trevor Lawrence and a strong history of really solid wide receivers at Clemson.
Thanks, Ben. And one more thing. In this class, and it's a very solid class for Auburn, they obviously held on to a lot of guys late that got more interest. Who, in your opinion, is the most important signee in the entire class, not just today, but in the early signing period, too?
You know, it's funny because we brought this up a little bit earlier when we were talking about Matthew Hill potentially flipping to safety. And Auburn's going to need someone to start at safety for them this year. I mean, they lost both of their senior starters with Trey Matthews and Stephen Roberts both graduating. And they saw that from the get-go in this class. And Quindarius Monday and Jamie Sherwood were the 2 guys that Kevin Steele, even coordinator Kevin Steele, really pinpointed in this class that he wanted. They both enrolled early for Auburn. So I think that Quindarius Monday and Jamie Sherwood are 2 names that Auburn fans are going to become very familiar with over these next couple of years because they're going to step into the back end of that defense probably in the 2018 season and be required to make an immediate impact.
Ben, thanks so much. Awesome work today on SECCountry.com.
Yeah, thank you guys.
That was great to hear from Ben Wolk, the Auburn SEC Country recruiting reporter. Hey, let's just recap the day. There's been quite a few schools that we have not talked about in the SEC. Of those, what stands out to you?
You know, I think we kind of hinted on Ole Miss. What they did with everything they're facing is definitely very impressive. I think Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher, you know, finishing 6th in the SEC and having to kind of rebuild that class from scratch. They got one of the best quarterbacks left on the board today in 4-star James Foster, and they really need that depth there. I think that was equally as impressive. Obviously, recruits that are committing to Texas A&M right now understand that there's a lot of stability with a 10-year, $75 million contract for Jimbo Fisher. And then, you know, the guys bringing up the rear, it's kind of what you expect. You know, those guys might, schools like Vanderbilt and Missouri, they might be able to go on a run, but they're always recruiting for their system, and they're never going to be among the league's elite recruiters.
I think I know your answer to this, but in your opinion, who won the day, who lost the day?
Well, it's got to be Georgia, right? I mean, without a doubt. I mean, Georgia dunked on everybody today. I think who lost the day, it's weird because I don't think Alabama had a bad class at all, but I think the biggest thing here is just how it looks. I think that's the biggest thing, and now that it's not just coupled with Alabama missing on some guys, it's Georgia having such a phenomenal class. I mean, there's suddenly, we saw what happened in the national championship game. We saw how insane that game was. There's a rivalry brewing between these two schools. They're really separating themselves as the elite of this conference, and I think today gave more fodder that Georgia's going to be there for years to come against Alabama.
And a lot of people have said just that in the comment section. They keep calling Kirby Smart the Nick Saban Jr. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think they're building a dynasty? That's not the right word to use, I don't think.
Hey, I mean, #3 class last year, #1 class this year. They already have the #1 class at this point for 2019. That's building something. They're going to have to keep putting it together. They're going to have to keep winning on the field, but they're getting the talent they need to compete at the highest level, and that's something they didn't always have under Mark Richt. One
more quick question before we get off air. What was your biggest surprise today?
Oh, man. That is a very good question. Again, I mean, I said this earlier in the show. I just think it's Georgia wrapping up the #1 class so quickly and with so much authority. I mean, they got Tyson Campbell, they got Quay Walker, they got Otis Reese, they clinched the class. Everything else is just icing on the cake for them.
Yeah, I have to say Quay Walker was a pretty big surprise for me. I really thought he was leaning Tennessee.
I think he had everybody fooled, and man, that is I know he's tweeted kind of his apologies for that, but that is a brutal, brutal way to commit to Georgia over one of their biggest rivals. Georgia fans love it, Tennessee fans hate it, but that's recruiting. Somebody's going to end up unhappy every time.
And wide receiver Tommy Bush, too, to Georgia. That was also a surprise for me as well. All right, thanks so much, guys, for watching our SEC Recruiting Notebook. For all of your recruiting needs all year long, we're literally here all year long talking about recruiting. That's what Pete is paid to do. He's our SEC Country recruiting editor, Pete Scandalberry. Head on over to SECCountry.com, and there we have all the information for you. I'm Hannah Chalker. Thanks, guys, again for watching. Stick it right here on SEC Country for all of the coverage. We'll see you next time.